Resilience. This is a conversation series. I think it's the 9th one in the series now, where we explore the prospect for a post-COVID economy and how communities and organizations can use the power of global partnerships and connections to set themselves up for recovery and what we hope will eventually be a world beyond the pandemic. Like I said, this is the 9th in the series. We've done industries, sectors, and topics like franchising, the arts and economic development, exports of services, medical innovation, which is obviously very important right now. Just a wide variety of topics with kind of the key uniting thread running through it all of, how do we prepare for what's to come, and how do we, even amid difficulty, use our connections wisely. And so with the theme of connections, I think it's a perfect segue for today, because we're talking about air route development. How do we link cities with the power of air travel, which has obviously been pummeled amid the pandemic, and has seen quite a number of shifts and starts and stops, and it is subject to a lot of uncertainty these days. So we've got some great featured speakers who are going to get our discussion going. But like we've said here, with as we've been introducing everyone, we've got a wide variety of expertise in the audience as well, from the diplomatic corps, from companies, from economic development agencies, people who have a lot of experience actually getting routes off the ground, pun intended. And we're excited about this. So I'm going to turn it over to Jorge and Guy from the Pendleton duo over there, and have them tell us a little bit more about the format. Guy, I think you've generally been the one that's doing that, but Jorge, if he's out of pocket, if you want to jump in and introduce Pendleton Group consulting firm.
Sure, thanks, Trevor. Well, thank you everybody for sharing part of the morning with us in this. For me, it's a fascinating topic of aviation. After spending 20 years flying planes, and then a tenure at Delta, it's a pleasure to have one former colleague here from Cincinnati Airport, and John, that we sort of planned together so much, and John, but the two John Wickson and John Parkinson, we were a team at Delta at International, specifically doing what we're talking about here. So it's a very exciting morning for us to relive that and talk about our experiences. From the Pendleton perspective, we're putting this resiliency a series of roundtables and who we are. And the reason we do this, it's because it's about economic development, and it's about partnerships and relationship with the community. From the Pendleton, we are a group of professionals that working with cities and with companies with their business development and their economic development. Guy and I specialize specifically on the international side with the strategies with the different organizations as they try to grow on international market. But you can find more information about the Pendleton Group at pendletona.com, and we're excited to continue on. So what we're going to do, Guy is trying to track down our Kia guests. And so what we're going to do is Trevor is going to start the conversation as an icebreaker, if you will, with John and with Elliott, and hopefully with Kia once if they're able to join us in. But what we want, it's really a group discussion. So this is not a panel. This is literally a conversation. We want to make sure that this is a two-way communications. And if you have a question, if you have an issue to bring, an experience to share, just literally raise your hand. Don't use any of the chat. And hopefully everybody's in with their mic and their camera so we could really have a conversation. So with that, Trevor, why don't you take it over?
Sure. Yes, and generally we have done kind of introductions of each person in the call. I think we're going to skip that this time, just because we might have a lot of new people jumping in. We had 44 people registered, so hopefully everything's okay with the link, and we'll get everybody in who wants to be. But I'm just going to go ahead and launch into the conversation with Elliott Paige, who's the Director of Air Service Development here at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, who's become a frequent guest. We love having Elliott join us because he always gives us a lot of food for thought and tells us a lot of things we didn't know before. And then we've got John Wickson, who's the Executive Principal from Hospitio Consulting Services. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us as well.
Pleasure.
I'm going to just jump into it, y'all. This is a crazy time for aviation, obviously, and I realize that we're framing this conversation about like kind of new routes and how do we think about preparing our communities for potentially fostering new connections between cities. But it strikes me that really today we're talking about which ones to restart versus which ones to recruit anew. And I wonder, Elliott, if you might start us off just talking about how airlines are even thinking about the way that they're restarting service after having trimmed down so much post-COVID.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor, and thanks for the invitation to this forum. Yeah, it's right now, it depends on which side of the airlines you're talking on. If you're talking about passengers, of course, they're in survival mode. They're trying as much as possible to stay open, to stay operational, to keep as much staff as they can without laying off people, and still provide service to those key cities that they can at least get a decent load factor on. You have we've seen flights with load factors as low as 10% of the aircraft.
Tell us what load factor is, just for the non-aviation fluent.
Sorry about that. And please, again,
okay.
If I start getting into the aviation speak, just stop me.
No, it's okay. That's okay. I think
It's
most people know.
Yeah, but load factor just means, the percentage of people that are on an aircraft. So an aircraft that can hold 100 people, but only has 10 people on it, that's a load factor of 10%.
Yeah.
So typically, airlines make a profit with load factors between 60 and 70%. And so load factors now are around maybe 60% is at a good time, on a high period like Thanksgiving or around Christmas. But what tends to happen, because we see the impact of the virus follows holidays or events where we bring a lot of people together, what you tend to see is that 2 to 3 weeks later, you see a peak in travel, and then it peters off that 2 to 3 weeks as the virus starts taking hold and people start canceling their reservations. So so that's load factor, and it's important to mention that because flying a plane with very few passengers is not economical. It's not it just doesn't work. It's not a business model that works. So we need more people to fly. We need people to feel confident that they're safe going through an airport on an aircraft from their origin to their destination. So it's not just about keeping Atlanta Airport clean and making sure that the airlines work together, but the destination airports also have to offer the same level of assurances. And so on the passenger side, they're in survival mode, but on the cargo side, we have a capacity problem. We don't have enough airlift on the cargo side because the demand for cargo has increased tremendously, especially with regards to moving PPEs and also e-commerce. With more people being at home, there's a deeper penetration of people ordering online through e-commerce, ordering on Amazon, and I'm sure all of you have your Amazon accounts, and you're ordering a lot more online than you used to, because people don't want to go to the brick and mortar stores, and that a lot of that moves via air for it to be for you to get next day delivery or same day delivery. So we are seeing a kind of a dual problem. Not enough capacity on cargo, but cargo is increasing. So there's success in cargo, but passenger, because of the human factor, it's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that in previous episodes here, where you mentioned how the reduction in passenger travel also precipitates reduction in cargo space, because you don't have the belly cargo that carries about half of global cargo, right? That in the bottom of the plane, that's ostensibly carrying just passengers. But John, I wanted to ask you how, Elliott's talking about load factors, and they're airlines are trying to restart routes where they can get a significant load factor, but in this environment where we have, changing regulations by the day. I mean, we saw just last week when the new Biden administration came in, they reinstituted the travel restrictions on Europe and South Africa and Brazil. And so when you're in the position of like trying to figure out which places are going to be the best utilize your assets, like how do you even make sense of it at a moment like this? Or can you?
Don't. All our traditional means of evaluating performance, and particularly for forecasting future performance, have pretty much gone out the window for a year now. And people have been using the word unprecedented for a long time now, but it truly, there is nothing. This is far bigger than 9/11's impact on the industry. Or even waves of bankruptcies. It's just we've never seen anything like it. So I think I'll answer that in a couple of ways, though. One is that in the short run, it's just looking for a sign of when recovery will start to happen and how quickly. And it's a cash flow exercise for the airlines right now. Airlines are tremendous generators of cash and tremendous consumers of cash. And last I looked, Delta was burning something like 12 million a day.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a continuing challenge until you get some combination of vaccine penetration and herd immunity, till people feel comfortable to travel again. And even then, it's not rolling out equally in all parts of the world. So international travel will continue to be impacted for a lot longer, I think, than domestic travel. The second thing I wanted to say on that point was that I think it's accelerating a trend we were already beginning to turn our minds to for forecasting air travel demand. Our traditional approach has been to look at databases of past demand, which we have quite robust data about how many people have traveled in the past month, year, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, between any two airports on the planet. And so forecasting was relatively straightforward exercise of, okay, if we add service, that many people have traveled in the past, we can assume some level of growth and something we call stimulation, which is sort of excess growth attributable to adding service in a market. We know that will happen. That doesn't really work now because, first of all, the historical data doesn't mean anything. And we're not really in growth mode anyway. So what it's accelerating is a trend towards looking for alternative data sources for future demand. Things like the global distribution systems like Sabre and Amadeus. These are the platforms that you directly or indirectly book through for not just air tickets, but hotels, rental cars, that sort of thing. They have very robust data on search activity for people searching for flights before they actually buy, well in advance of the time they might actually purchase. Similarly, the search engines, Google and the like, have a lot of data on what people are searching for, obviously. So we haven't really begun to exploit those data sources for seeing what are people searching for today that may turn into demand down the road. And I think it's accelerating looking at those for a sign of, hey, which markets are recovering? Because we know they're not all going to grow back at the same rate, and when.
Yeah, I'm curious too as to how tied to the actual demand a flight has to be, right? Like, so, we've heard about planes flying empty, right, to preserve slots. Elliott, maybe, I don't know if you want to jump in on that too, but I'd love to hear both of y'all talk about how airlines preserve their market share through flying and how that may play into where they decide to continue flying, even if the load factor may not make sense in the short run.
Yeah.
And then we'll back into some other stuff that's more relevant to our communities and country partners here on the conversation.
Yeah, that's an important point, because I'm actually in talks with a couple of different airlines. Some of them are your economic air service type airlines that are subsidized by the government, by the federal government, to provide essentially a service to rural cities or rural areas. And they're really looking at what are some of those secondary cities or destinations that are being canceled by the big carriers, the Deltas, United, and so forth, that they can fit into. But at the same time, they're worried that if the market comes back, that they may lose those markets due to competition from the big carriers. So that is happening right now. I mean, it's an opportunity for smaller carriers to service some of those closer destinations. At the same time, you know, there was a relaxing of the CARES Act, where at first it was you had to maintain your original routes, and there was a relaxing of that because it didn't make sense for some airlines to continue to fly practically empty to some routes just to keep their slots.
Right.
So they're allowed to cancel slots and to restart them later on. We're at the airport. We do, we have to have a fine balance, because we offered some reprieve on some costs, like terminal charges. We're still discussing what are some other charges that we can provide. Waiving some of these charges to the airlines so that they can all get some reprieve in their survival. Now, we have to be careful because we don't get government subventions or any money from the government. We survive on making money through our own business, through the business of aviation. So there's a limit to which we can provide services. Now, we do have the ability to draw down. In Atlanta's case, we got $338 million as part of the CARES Act from the federal government, and we can draw down on that, and we are for construction, to continue with our capital improvement program, but also to make sure we maintain at least 90% of the employees that we have, and we can use it for some general support of all airlines. We're not allowed to be biased, or to pinpoint specific airlines. We have to kind of make it general. So we are looking at how do we modify that package at the same time, making sure that we survive, but we know that we need the airlines to survive in that process.
Right. Yeah, John, I don't know if you wanted to jump in on that, the point Elliott made about how I found it interesting that smaller airlines are trying to seeing this as an opportunity maybe to jump in where some of the big guys might be cutting back. But did you want to talk about like broader competitive trends that are taking shape in this environment?
Sure, there are a couple of things there. I mean, one, on the competitive front, just for the benefit of the non-aviation people, a slot is basically a permission to take off and land. It comes in pairs of departure time and arrival time at an airport. And the US is a bit different from most of the world in that we only have half a dozen airports where they actually have a slot system. Hartsfield, in spite of being the busiest airport in the world for most of the last couple of decades, has no slot environment. So Delta's not at any risk, for example, by canceling flights at Atlanta from losing those permissions. However, the airports in the US that are slotted, like New York and Washington and Chicago, are obviously very commercially important. So airlines would try to maintain those slots by maintaining service as much as possible, might use smaller aircraft. But there's also been a lot of relief offered because almost every airport internationally is slotted. And there's a recognition that airlines are not going to be able to comply with those normal slot rules. So there's been a lot of relief offered. So market share is a luxury they haven't been able to worry about too much right now. As to the competitive piece, though, about smaller airlines, that's absolutely true. What we've seen in the United States with the majors, meaning American, United, and Delta, the three big guys that are network carriers, meaning their customers are generally people flying from, often anyway, from connections from smaller communities to their entire global network. They've pulled back from the smallest of the small, outright pulled all service from some of the smallest spokes they operate to. And they've retrenched to their core hubs. They live and die by their hubs, the Atlantas, the Chicagos, the Dallases of the world. And so things like Raleigh, which was a focus city for Delta, overnight was pulled back to just essentially being a spoke. But it's absolutely the opposite for what we call the low-cost carriers, or especially the ultra low-cost carriers, because over the years, low-cost carriers like Southwest have become kind of venerable, and their costs aren't quite as low as they used to be. Whereas the Spirit Airlines of the world are much lower in cost. They've taken this as an opportunity. Southwest has moved into Chicago O'Hare and Miami and Houston Intercontinental, big congested airports where they've declined to operate before because they see an opportunity. It's a limited time opportunity to get in, establish themselves, and gain market share.
Yeah, and I saw Andrew Staunton had his hand up, the Consul General of the United Kingdom. I'm not sure if Andrew has a comment or a question. Andrew, what would you like to interject?
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna go to Bobby and ask you what's going on in Cincinnati. So just be ready.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much for this, Trevor, and thanks to Elliott and John for such useful information. I may have some comments later about what's happening in the United Kingdom, which is the major transatlantic group for all US airlines and for British Airlines. I had a conversation with the CEO of the Global Health Crisis Coordination Center on Monday, and he was saying, Ken Berta, he was saying he was having conversations with Delta. And I just wondered if there's an opportunity there, because say, for example, the United Kingdom, we have restrictions on flights, but Delta, United, and others operate in a continent-sized country. So there must be an opportunity for Delta and airports like Atlanta to lead the way in terms of building that consumer confidence by being the market leaders in terms of putting in place those measures which will increase people's confidence to fly, to travel, to understand the point-to-point issues around the health situation at one airport, at another airport, and almost to inform others of the results of their experiments, because we're all struggling with that. How do we let international travel happen? But when you're a country the size of the United States, that intrastate travel offers so many opportunities for learning points for other international partners.
Good point. Elliott, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. I know you've got a lot of collaborations with various airports around the world, so maybe that
I mean,
could provide a lens.
I would say it this way. So you're right. Domestically, the US is lucky in that it's a huge domestic market. So airlines can still do pretty well surviving on domestic traffic. And internationally, we talk to a lot of airports about what's happening on their side of the pond. What are some of the measures that they're taking, and share with them what we're doing as well to make passengers comfortable. There's a lot that we're doing in terms of, keeping passengers social distancing, making sure that staff, we're all required to wear a mask at the airport. We're taking all the right precautions already, and we're sharing these best practices across the pond. But the challenge is that as cities as countries like UK or South Africa develop, not only increase incidence of the virus, but new strains that are more contagious, then that creates those travel restrictions automatically shuts that market down for us. So it's not that the airports are not trying, and they're doing all they can, but whenever there's a massive outbreak of the virus, and governments put travel restrictions on, and understandably so, because they're trying to restrict it from their country. Because ironically, air service is the best way to spread this virus. You move people from one country to the next, and that's how we spread it across continents. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, I think so. So Bobby, you spent some time here in Atlanta, I know, with Delta. So what is the vantage point from a place like Cincinnati, which has been a Delta hub in the past, I know, and what does it look like from an airport that's not the busiest in the world, right?
Certainly a different picture than what you are experiencing in Atlanta. Cincinnati does have a long history with Delta, and years ago when we were a major hub, not the size of Atlanta, but certainly very important to the Delta network, it was all about connecting flows. The international routes that operated from CVG got up to 7 or 8 nonstop destinations at the point. We're all about bringing people from the country to Cincinnati, connecting them to Europe. And at the time, I was with the international network planning in Atlanta with Delta. But 90%, even more so, 95% of the people on an aircraft weren't from Cincinnati. So the way the world has changed the last 10 years with Delta moving the hub operation from Cincinnati to Detroit, it's about the local market. So we've consolidated down to what can the local market support to Europe. And right now it has been in the past the Paris service that Delta provided. It has been suspended since April. We're closely monitoring the situation, working with Delta on a communication plan just to make sure that we know what's taking place in the local market. What I would say in terms of forecasting and looking out, the communications that the chambers, the consuls, and the other economic development groups and the local community has with local companies and corporations is critical right now. I'll give you an example. We have 4 or 5 major companies here that have a lot of European travel in the past, and we tend to have biweekly, monthly calls with them to monitor what their situation is in terms of their future demand needs or travel needs are. But most of the companies have very strong travel policies, and they've color-coded countries by red, by orange, by yellow in terms of the quarantine measures or the infection rates in those countries. And as long as things stay in red, orange, or yellow, that travel is not likely to take place. And but to John's point earlier, the historical means of how to forecast travel and what makes a realistic business case for future travel, those are out the window. And what we're closely monitoring search data right now. And believe it or not, there was actually a report coming out of Europe last week that showed how people are now looking into June, July, August for future travel. And the rate of international searches is up in Europe, for example, for people looking, anticipating with the vaccines coming online that they will start to travel again in 3rd or 4th quarter. But for a market like Cincinnati, you have to really look at what those destinations are that you can sustain locally, as opposed to connecting where Atlanta can bring the world to Atlanta. We have to take our community to the world. So you have to be pretty strategic about what those opportunities are. I think one of the things, and Elliott maybe can speak to this, because I think Atlanta is going to be well positioned for it in certain areas, is that carriers are going to shift from the bigger aircraft, and you're already seeing Delta do this to some degree, where they've grounded their 777s and 747s. But there's new technologies coming online where you can take a 9-10 hour flight on an aircraft that hosts 175, 200 people. So you're able to look at markets differently now than you were 10 years ago, where you needed the ability to fill a 300, 400 seat airplane. So I think that's going to open up the world, especially when the world is going to be initially more family and friends oriented. I haven't seen my parents in a year, or my mom anyway, for a year.
Wow.
Just from a standpoint of keeping everyone safe. But that's happening all over the world. And once this vaccine is out there, the friends and family aspect is going to be huge, especially Atlanta to Central South America. But that's not your corporate traveler. And sometimes that's, the business model Delta has, they need that front cabin filled to be able to manage their economics. So there will be opportunities for new carriers, the foreign carriers, and some of those that are more focused on people coming into the United States.
Right.
If you look at Aer Lingus, for example, in Europe, Historically, they've been restricted to flying their brand out of Ireland. The new opportunities that are presenting, Aer Lingus is looking at Manchester out of the UK, focusing on picking up routes that Thomas Cook dropped as they went out of business and as a result of the pandemic or partially result of. So you're going to see new opportunities where Aer Lingus's business model and cost structure would allow them to carry a plane full of 85, 90% leisure customers as opposed to needing a strong mix of corporate and leisure. So I think the next 24 months is going to be about the leisure customer, the family and friends type customer, and that's going to benefit some of the carriers that have lower cost structures and some of those carriers mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I feel like we're now getting into the kind of foundational discussion about what's looking forward versus looking backward. And I wanted to, you mentioned, Bobby, I think that was so fascinating that y'all are in regular consultation with your companies, your local companies, as to, you know, where they need to travel. And I wanted to bring in Rick Douglas of Kia. Rick, how are you? I saw that you had joined us. I can't hear you. Yeah, here you go. Okay, I can hear you now.
It's good to be here. I apologize for being late. We got caught up in a couple of meetings, so
that's okay. So I understand that some reporting I did a few years ago looked at, you know, the origin destination traffic for Atlanta and which markets were tops in terms of people, you know, getting on the plane in one city and getting off in Atlanta, because generally that's not what happens in Atlanta. People transfer. I think Elliott can correct me, but I think it's about 2/3 or something.
80%.
80 now. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, Seoul, Korea was the top market in terms of origin destination traffic, according to Brookings a while back, Brookings Institution. So I wanted to, you know, since we're talking about what companies need, I wanted to see if you could give us a little bit of a sense for how important those Atlanta to Seoul routes are for Kia's business here in Georgia. I think there may be a delay of some sort. Still can't hear you. Can y'all hear him? Okay, good.
Okay.
There you are.
Sorry about that. I can't overstate the importance of those routes. We have not just our facility, but a number of suppliers in our immediate area that depend on that route or those routes and those that accessibility to do day-to-day business. This year alone, we've had over 700 special air freight deliveries just to maintain operation in this COVID pandemic as it's grasped the supply chain around the world. We normally have a very sophisticated logistics system that can project and predict any of those things, but had it not been for the accessibility and the efficiency of the airport in Atlanta, we would not have been as productive this year as we have been. We send people to Korea for training, for development purposes, but we also bring a lot of human resources out of Korea, people that are doing tech supports for the different model launches that we support and design changes and tooling. If you think about, we build, 5,000 vehicles a week. Each of those reflects thousands of different component parts and tens of thousands subcomponents, all of those coming from all over the world. Many of them coming through the way of the airport. And we've had a very good success rate. Normally our turnaround time for parts coming through the airport is all the customs and all the related activities, 6 to 7 hours just to get them from time of arrival, to get them out of the airport to on the road to us. Now, that efficiency in an airport that big cannot be, you can't overstate the importance of that and the benefit of that to businesses. We've sent, as I mentioned, over 700 air freights. We, even with the COVID pandemic, we sent over 200 people on international travels this year. We've got another 500 scheduled for 2021. So it's a tremendous benefit and very valuable to us and all of our supplier network.
Well, I think it's maybe easy at this point in the life cycle of the Kia plant, which has been here, it's been open for over 10 years now. And so I think 2009 was when it opened. But, you know, I wonder, and maybe our aviation experts will jump into this, and I also want to bring in Roberto who's got some experience in Costa Rica. But, you know, it's the chicken and egg question. Like, do you have to have a soul flight before you can get a Kia, or is the Kia, you know, the reason that you can sustain a soul flight? And I think for other communities and countries that are looking at how to attract new connections and new routes, I mean, this is an important point. So I don't know if y'all want to comment on that. And then I'm going to go to Bobby or Roberto, because I think he's got some interesting experience on how you get a route kickstarted.
Maybe I start, and then from our perspective, it is maybe a chicken and egg situation. If we look at two airlines that I've recruited since I've been here, Turkish and Qatar, both airlines started first with cargo service. So, you know, you really see movement in terms of goods trade first, and it's goods trade with the businesses that are already there and the community that's already there. And then that eventually expands to a passenger service. Now, as all of you know, and what this discussion is about, the direct service encourages more investment. And that's why we work, you know, part of my work is to make sure we get more and more direct service to Atlanta, because we see that as promoting more investment. But I'm also working to improve the cargo side of it. I'm happy to hear the comment by Rick about our efficiency. For us, 7 hours is a long time, and we're trying to reduce that time to be even more efficient. So we're adding, you know, technology, digital cargo community system. We built a truck staging area so that the trucks could maneuver easier to the warehouses. And we're still putting a lot of other things in place as we go along. But it's important for us to find these efficiencies so that the companies, that the Atlanta is attractive to begin with. When I pre-COVID, when we would go out and market the airport and market the city, we talked about what the airport has to offer in terms of amenities and its warehouse facilities, its efficiencies, and about the new business, the new clients that we've gotten over the years. But we also talk a lot about the city and what the city has to offer, and the fact that the city has become, and this region has become, a cluster of industries related to automotive, related to aerospace, pharmaceuticals, industries that are cargo reliant and also reliant on direct service. So we market that, and that in itself makes us more attractive, makes it easier to sell. So Atlanta's success makes it easier to sell to others to improve that success.
Yeah, and I know you've sort of created coalitions as well with, kind of combining data, like with a particular route, say Istanbul. I know that you had the economic development community kind of help you with, reports or data around what kind of business is there. But this gets at like a quality versus quantity kind of question. I mean, you have to have both, it sounds like. And I wonder if, or quantitative and qualitative, I wonder if John, if you'll talk about, what do we not understand, or what do economic developers need to understand about how airlines make those decisions? Is it based on purely on data? Is it the feel from the executive? Is it the availability of the aircraft that they need to actually utilize? I mean, it seems that sometimes these routes start and stop really quickly, and you wonder, how did they project that this was going to be so great, and they stopped it 3 months later?
It's a great question, and it's sort of all of the above. I'm going to touch on a couple of points that came up before, just to add a perspective, if I could. The chicken and egg question, sometimes it's the chicken, sometimes it's the egg, from the airline's perspective. Meaning, sometimes there's an established demand pool that you recognize has reached maturity and you're ready for nonstop service, and you add the flight and it just builds from there. And sometimes the flight comes a bit before the demand, and creates the demand is almost not too strong a word, because well, I can put it in a much larger economic context. The reason the Atlantas and Dallases of the world are attracting so many headquarters and facilities, and why urban agglomerations are doing so much better economically than rural areas, is because it's a self-catalyzing reaction. International air service goes to where there's domestic air service and lots of population, and that in turn just creates this chain reaction of development. Every time Delta adds an international flight to a new, let's say, transoceanic destination, the size of the local market, that is the number of people going to from Atlanta and that international point, will easily double within a year and may even grow by more than that, just depending on how big it was. And that's a permanent increase in the size of the market as long as the service is sustained. And that in turn attracts things like manufacturers, when they're thinking about where to locate a North American facility or headquarters, well, they're going to put it somewhere where there's international service, hopefully to their home point. So that's a big part of the thought process. So it's mostly data-based, to answer the core question you asked me. Again, we have the historical demand. We know how to account for that extraordinary growth that I referred to, that stimulation effect. And we do a bit of the qualitative stuff, looking into, hey, who are the corporates that are traveling? Bobby could speak to that. He and I used to talk about that when developing new routes at Delta, because I'll tell a story on myself. You know, some of the data and using analogies doesn't always work. We had a lot of success at Delta flying out of Portland, Oregon to Tokyo and Nagoya, Japan. And we sort of used what would you call a transitive property to say, well, if Portland to these did well, then maybe Portland Fukuoka will do well, which is the next biggest point in Japan. And that was literally one that we did pull within months. And Bobby said, I told you so, but in the nicest possible way. We had less data and less sophistication at that time. And frankly, Bobby and I both had less gray hair. But you know, there are times where you do need to account for more than just the observed data, and look at what's the sustainable base of traffic that can be grown. As to the freight part, that's a really important point that I wanted to add this to. There are a relatively small fleet of freighters in the world, actually dedicated aircraft that don't have any seats on them, that are strictly for carrying freight around. You may have heard a bit about that in terms of the challenge of getting the COVID vaccines distributed throughout the world. The vast majority of worldwide air freight capacity is in the belly of passenger airplanes, meaning below your feet, where your bags are. And this is on the twin aisle aircraft. The aircraft, when you get on board, there's two ways to go up and down the, you know, with a section of seats in the middle. Those are where the majority of the world's air freight are carried. And with the passenger economics being so terrible right now, many of those aircraft are sitting on the ground. Because it's just not economical to fly them. Well, in ordinary times, the freight may be the difference between that airplane making money or not. In fact, typically without it, it wouldn't. It's almost not a stretch to say that airlines fly people around as a break-even proposition for the opportunity to make money carrying freight and sell them ancillary products like Wi-Fi or checked bags or what have you. That they're to the point that airlines are, you know, now carrying freight in seats, getting, you know, special permission to do that sort of thing. So there you go.
Yeah, very, very fascinating. Yeah, and it sounds like it's an all of the above proposition. I think we had Roberto drop off. I wanted to bring him in because you know, Delta flies to or flew at least to Liberia, Costa Rica, which is, you know, what at the time that they began the flight, it was sort of an off the beaten path destination, not really a tourism hub, but
that was on my watch. I can talk about that one if you like.
yeah. I mean, my understanding of it, and Jorge, you can jump in too, is that there was, you know,
I own the flight.
that the Patillo, you know, Mr. Patillo sort of underwrote the startup of the flight and said, you know, if you don't get a certain amount of traffic, I'll basically guarantee the revenue that you're going to get on the flight. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah. Let's let John talk about that and say whether or not I am accurate in characterizing that and whether there's a model there, and then we'll go to Ani.
100% right. It's a relatively rare model. It's not the only time we've seen it. You see it in ski markets seasonally, where the ski resorts will get together and sort of guarantee a certain level of performance. In other words, if the airline's ticket sales fall short of a certain level, they'll make up the difference. You also sometimes see it in Caribbean destinations. Well, Liberia, because the Patillos had a big investment in that community and knew it was going to grow, came to us and asked us would we be willing to operate that flight. And there was very little data at that point to go on in terms of historical traffic there, so they were willing to do that. And I think they did have to initially make good on like a small amount in the first couple of months, but it took off immediately as they knew it would, and they did know that ahead of us. In general, the airlines have lots of really good data and aren't too surprised by things. But in a situation like that, where the infrastructure preceded the demand, and they knew that they were taking other steps to create that demand for the future, it absolutely worked out that way.
Yeah, I love that story.
When you talk about economic development, I mean, the amount of investment that went into Liberia in big chain hotels that were planted in their properties were just fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's a matter of just getting the pieces aligned and very, in the right time frame. I went down there in 2009, and it was still an airport where I'm not sure if it is now, but where you had to get off on the tarmac and walk in to go through customs. So, Ani, you had a question?
I'm glad we have our friends from state also here, as well as Elliott and other experts. My question to all of you is this, that Air India has recently announced 2 routes from Bangalore to San Francisco and Hyderabad to San Francisco. And I believe that they are considering a couple of other routes which are up for sale. And I want to ask Elliott and our friends from state here, have we made any efforts recently to connect with Air India? Elliott, I know you were there a couple of years back, and state has been also contemplating about it. I think we need to look into that market now.
Yeah. No, I mean, since COVID and maybe maybe the year before that, we haven't had substantial discussions with Air India, primarily because we weren't sure what was happening with Air India. They were in a lot of debt and they were looking for buyers and so forth. So, we were more focused on what would be the potential for Delta to do a flight to maybe Mumbai or Delhi. So we've had a couple of talks with Delta's network planners on that. Of course, those talks have paused for the time being. We are focused on how we can build cargo with Mumbai or Hyderabad. So we are in those talks and maybe having a sister airport agreement to kind of push the cargo side of it.
Yeah.
And we think that will eventually lead to passenger service, because I mean, India is an easy case. It's just a matter of having good economy, and we very much thought that the New York route would have been out of Atlanta until the very last minute, and a lot of things happened that changed that. But I think India is an easy case for us.
Well, to me, that gets to the question of like when you jump from transfer traffic to direct, because you've got such great infrastructure, like transferring through Europe to India to various destinations. The Qatar Airways has lots of service into India. Turkish has service in India. So Delta via Amsterdam and via Charles de Gaulle, in Paris, like have great connections to various places in India. So it's like, when does it get to that point where it needs to be a nonstop? And that to me is an interesting question that I'm sure y'all are always wrestling with. I wanted to bring in our consular or tourism representatives and see if y'all have any inputs or thoughts or questions. Yael Golan is here with the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, and I know that the Israelis, as far as I understand, have always been coveting that Atlanta Tel Aviv flight that left a really long time ago. And
2011.
Yeah, so I wonder if there's any thoughts about that, or how would that affect the traffic, do you think? I mean, how would that create demand if you're able to see that come back at some point?
All right. I feel that we've been talking. Just to give you an idea of who we are, some of you have been working with the consulate. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have their, I don't know how many representations in the US. The Israel Ministry of Tourism, since the US is our #1 market, the #1 market for travel to Israel, has 4 offices in the States, which work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but we're an independent. So you guys know us as a tourism board, but we're a government agency in New York, Chicago, LA, and we're the only tourism board who has an office in Atlanta because a significant number of our passengers are faith-based. So Atlanta is the capital of the South. So we work throughout Georgia, North and South Carolina, Florida, Texas. So just to give it in perspective, because I know it's not a natural understanding, but you're right. I wasn't here. I was still in Israel, but we lost the Delta Atlanta Tel Aviv flight, and many people before me, including Guy Tesler here and many others, have been working with the airport and with Delta to try and bring it back. And while in 2011, the numbers weren't, right after the flight stop, the numbers weren't high enough to advocate for that, but we've doubled the number of our passengers from North America. So just to give you giving you the numbers, we had 4.5 million tourists in 2019, and over 1 million were from North America. So this is the farthest destination to Israel and still the biggest. And North America has more travelers than all the other 5 markets after it. So Russia, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany combined. So 1.2 million. And a part of that number came from opening new gateways. So in Israel's case, and now I can say it very clearly, the supply creates the demand. And we saw it with Miami. So Miami was not a gateway. And then El Al came in November 2017. And right before COVID, wanted to go up to 4 flights a week. So from 0 to a flight that brings in tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people. So going back to, I don't remember who spoke about the data prediction versus the GDS systems. We were able to see, you have the theory of economics. You want to see a demand to lift new planes, but sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes the supply creates a demand, and now that we're unable to forecast a year in advance what the customer behavior will be, because that's what airlines used to do, we need to look at other ways. So Elliott, you mentioned cargo. 100%. Well, I agree with you.
I don't know if y'all can hear me. I think I'm having some internet connectivity problems, but Guy and Jorge, if y'all want to, we're about at the time. Y'all want to make some final comments and close this out?
I'm sorry, I'm just very.
Yeah, no, we can hear you. Yeah, why don't you finish your thoughts, and then we'll end with that.
It's okay. You can.
Yeah, no, but I think that's a great point. That sometimes things don't work by the book, especially when it comes to Israelis. But that's a different story. And I think that this was a very fascinating conversation. Anyone else wants to chime in? Yes, John.
I'd like to just add something. I was at Delta for 15 years as their international attorney in-house, and as continue to follow it. But I was on the first Delta nonstop from JFK to Budapest back in 2007, and there's a connection. I was on the inaugural flight, and on the return flight, the ambassador of Hungary, sitting next to me, asked if I would be interested in acting as their honorary consul. The point is, I just wanted to illustrate that, when you have there are a lot of hubs that are not just Atlanta or Chicago or JFK or Philadelphia increasingly, but there are hubs on the other side of the pond as well. And, for a carrier or for a person like me who wants to travel to other destinations within Europe, naturally you don't have nonstop flights from Atlanta or those places, but it's become increasingly important to rely on your alliance partners. And Kosha from the Netherlands was here, but I think of all the connections I've made through Amsterdam on whether Delta Metal or KLM Metal to get to Hungary or to other destinations in Europe. I think it becomes increasingly important for the airports and the airlines to coordinate very closely with their alliance partners, especially when you have the kinds of challenges that we have now. And I'd be happy to hear John or Elliott or Bobby Spann to even comment on that if we have time.
Yeah, so basically we are at the top of the hour, and if anybody needs to leave, that's fine. Typically we'll let the things kind of flow naturally until everybody gets totally bored and tired of that. But before we get to that, perhaps Abby or Nico from the States perspective, what's your take on this whole topic?
Well, I have two. I mean, first, from an economic development perspective, a direct flight. I mean, like, there's nothing that helps as much as a direct international flight. It helps with tourism. It helps with investment, and Nico can probably speak to that more than I did in his former capacity as head of our FDI team. But we have a running list. Our friends at Delta know that our commissioner is always talking to them about, at this point, when post-COVID, what routes can we reinstate and how quickly? My question and kind of comments, our tourism marketing team is talking a lot, about, we're culling through the data, constantly looking at seeing a lot of optimism. It might be aspirational optimism about travel returning. And I'm curious to hear if anybody has any insights on what patterns those returns will look like. Like, we're seeing more road trips planned. We're seeing people in Germany and UK in particular booking travel, leisure travel in the summer and in the fall. Do we expect that to be a cascade? Do we expect that to be a series of stutter steps, just like a very slow rollout? How, like, I don't know. Curious to see on the leisure travel side, as we know that they're the first to reemerge. But first, if Nico can jump in from that international investment side, please.
Yeah, to your point, Abby, I think the direct international flights are crucial to our economic development efforts, and the airport is a huge, if not the main factor for Georgia to be where it is right now in terms of its business footprint. But one of these things that is also incredibly important, and Jorge and I have mentioned this many times in our pitches to companies, is the connectivity once you get to Atlanta. So to John Parkerson's point, once you get to Atlanta, there's, under non-COVID-19 circumstances, 10 direct flights a day to Detroit, or 12 to, I'm just throwing it out there. And that is just what sets us aside from competitors. And once you get to Atlanta, and once you have that critical mass of like customers and business partners, once you're ready to take that next step to be physically in the US, when I talk about FDI, you have already that familiarity with Atlanta and with Georgia. So that's a huge, it's very impactful on I think on our state's economy.
Hey y'all, sorry for dropping out there. I think Michelle has a question. Michelle has a question.
Yes, Trevor, thank you. I'm the Consul General of Belgium, for those that haven't met yet. Of course, the fact that there is a direct connection between Brussels and Atlanta has been really instrumental to the fact that Georgia is actually the state with the highest number of Belgian companies in the whole of the US. So it's not by chance. And we get lots of requests also of people who want to travel. And we will have a big economic mission in October next year. And the fact that also that Atlanta was one of the 3 cities chosen in the US has to do with the fact that we have a direct connection again. But one point I would like to attract your attention to, maybe maybe from a very European perspective, and I haven't heard the word today, is we evolved towards a stricter regulation in terms of what can be done with planes within Europe, especially for short distances. And so the multimodality of airports for cargo, but even for passengers, is a growing I wouldn't say preoccupation, but growing factor in many choices that the airports and the travel companies and the plane companies make. And so this is just something, because it's so very different from the discussion that you have here. But I do believe that in Europe, for shorter distances, more and more what will be important is how fast you can bring the cargo or the passengers from the plane to the train and then to the next city. And I used to be posted in China for a long time, and there also actually the multimodality was a big thing. And yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I don't know, Sergio, did you have a chance to speak? I'm fascinated by all the German companies we have here. I know you work beyond Germany, across Europe, but I remember speaking with the CEO of Porsche North America at the time, and him saying that without that Stuttgart flight, that they may not have re-upped on their investment in Atlanta, and the fact that that was there was a huge factor. Is that, Stuttgart, other cities that we are connected to directly, Frankfurt, are those just vital in terms of making the case?
Absolutely, and it's Düsseldorf, it's Frankfurt, it's Stuttgart, it's Munich, and for prospective German investors, it's a strong point to our value proposition, and it saves executives a lot of time, and it ensures that there's predictability in their travel. It is often brought up, and folks here are monitoring the reinstatement of those flights and how quickly things may return to normal. But obviously the situation here on the ground, as far as the rate of vaccinations and how the process of easing the measures here will certainly dictate the frequency of the flights back to the U.S.
Yeah, and Theo, I'm not sure if you were able to speak yet, the consul from Greece. I know you got some big ambitions for maybe this summer, like trying to get folks traveling back to Greece. Do you know what the aviation connections look like yet?
From the U.S. And especially from the southeast, Atlanta used to be the hub. We used to have a direct flight to Athens. This didn't work. I think it stopped. It's been 8 years or something, I think, so far. It would be good, and I think that at the moment, because we will have, I think, a global restart and rebooting in the tourism industry, because people have been confined for over almost a year, and I think that they are eager to travel and make that, let's say, even to more exotic destinations. I mean, not just a road trip to a neighboring state or domestic flights somewhere around there. I think that they will be eager, and numbers indicate that they will be eager to travel, even to far off destination. So I think it is opening a direct flight at this moment. Specifically speaking about Athens, would also give a competitive advantage in the share of the market. For example, for Delta, this is my opinion. I think because for the southeast and for all Greeks and other people who would like to travel to a southern European destination, especially as it is Athens in Greece, it would give it a competitive advantage at this point that the market is about to reopen. Sooner or later, I think by this summer it will reopen.
Yeah, great.
Trevor, if I want to say something not about Israel,
sure,
because I spoke a lot about Israel.
Doing your job. That's okay.
Connecting to what Theodoros, I hope I said it right, said, and Abby had to jump off. We're seeing a lot of domestic travel right now. So now is 2020 and 2021 will be the years of road trips. We're seeing, great, but jumps in prices of motorcycles, big cars, RVs, all of that. So for all of us who live here, we've been traveling domestically. So the pent-up demand for international travel exists. there are a lot of people who lost from this crisis, but a lot of people who benefited, and there are still people who want to travel internationally to, like Theodoro said, exotic places that have good health care. So it's a kind of combination of going back to bucket lists. Bottom line, there is pent-up demand for international travel. People want to travel, period.
Yeah.
So it's important to.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder, and this will probably be my last question. I think we'll let everybody go. But from the airport side, I'm curious, do y'all see any unification of the standards for verifying basically that people are vaccinated? Like, are all the airport bodies working together? Like, Elliott, I know you've been involved at the WTO a long time ago. Like, do you see this kind of multinational collaboration on getting to a standard that would enable people to travel?
Not yet, but it has to happen, and it's starting to happen. We're seeing more collaborative efforts coming out of this government, the federal government, with international governments, and also domestic attempts at getting more and more Americans vaccinated. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a doctor, and she was saying it's very difficult to get herself and her staff vaccinated. However, there's now communication, and so she sees that there is an improvement and a move to get more and more people vaccinated. And there's no way to do this on our own. We have to have a multilateral. I mean, anyone who knows me knows I'm a multilateralist, multinationalist by nature. There's no way to get rid of this virus unless we do it with a multinational approach. Regarding the question of what do we expect to be some of the improvements, we're already seeing some of it. People are indeed pent up and are traveling, including overseas. They're not necessarily going across the Atlantic, but they are going to the Caribbean and to the Bahamas and so forth, to close by places for a break, to get out of their house, just to get a break from being indoors all the time. So VFRs, visiting friends and family, are going to continue to travel. They're the ones that are always traveling, regardless of where the virus is. People are traveling, even with the restrictions of quarantining, staying in the hotel, being tested upon arrival. People are being tracked on their phones. People don't mind doing those things once they can get a break. So people are taking advantage of opportunities to go, somewhere to get a break. I know I'm planning to do something like that myself soon. Yeah. The challenge is the business travel, because if you take, just as how we have a large number of Belgian companies and Korean companies, we have a large number of German companies because of our direct routes with Frankfurt and Dusseldorf and so forth. And we're now seeing that these, I had a discussion with, I think maybe through you, Sergio, with a couple of German interests, and that there is that they want to travel, but they're concerned about being stuck in a country for 2-week quarantine period or whatever the quarantine periods are. So once we see more people getting vaccinated and we start, getting more herd immunity, and even without 100% or even close to 100% vaccination, once we start seeing lifting of travel bans, we will see a pickup of more business travel, and that's beneficial to the airlines, because that's the front of the plane. That's where the profit centers are for most airlines. So that's kind of what I'll end with. My hope is that we roll out the vaccines fast enough. The Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, whoever else can start producing more, and we can get more and more people vaccinated, because that will help both economies across the world to be stimulated, including my industry.
Yeah, Elliott, I just want to let you know, and Bobby, I attended the other day on virtual meeting. I can't remember the name of the organization. It's the Association of U.S. Airports, and what you're talking about in terms of the forecast of what they see. They showed from the present. They show a slide of the top 10 destinations exit U.S. And it's amazing. The number one that has not been affected at all is Cancun, and it's because of they don't have restrictions, right? The rest are all flat almost. But the conversation came out exactly what you're talking about, in the sense that the pent-up demand for leisure travel will be it's the first one that will probably that will take off, of course, with measures and so forth and so on. The issue with the business travel, of course, measures help, but companies really are now looking at all the savings that they have done from lack of travel. So that perspective is going to change. And there were talk about from the three major carriers in terms of for the international business for the international travel, the reconfiguration of classes, lower numbers of business class, and then putting more effort on the economy comfort, if you will, because people will pay, including for leisure travel, for the business comfort, for the economy comfort, or whatever the airline calls it. It changes by name. But there has been a paradigm shift that where they're saying business travel is not that it's not going to come back. Of course, it will come back. Those relationships and meetings are extremely important. But there has been some paradigm shift in terms of budget making, particularly for the next 2-3 years, in terms of business travel. So that kind of plays into what we're all talking about. At least there was a consensus of that. And I imagine you probably have seen something similar to that, Bobby, or in some of your meetings. And John Wickson, I don't know if you agree with that, but I just wanted to share that with the group.
No, totally agree with you, Jorge.
Yeah, I think business traffic is coming back. The question is, will it come back fully? And I think there's probably some diminishment, but when is kind of the more critical question for us right now.
Right.
Just to if I could offer one sort of closing thought, as somebody who used to sit on the side of the table at an airline where people would make their case for airports and communities, why we should fly there, and now in my current role sort of sometimes assists those people. Something that's often confused by people outside the business is volume with profits. And the challenge, Theodoros and Yael mentioned the volumes to Athens and to Israel. That's not a problem whatsoever to either of those destinations. As a rule of thumb, think the lie flat seats for business class account for maybe 20% of the seats on the airplane, but on a route that's going to make money, they have to account for about half the revenue. And so if you can't fill those with people paying business class fares, it doesn't matter how many people you pack in the coach cabin, it won't make money.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, man. Well, lots to chew on here. I've been particularly interested to see how European companies and U.S. companies doing business in Europe have continued to travel even with all the restrictions, getting exceptions, and being able to do their essential business or commission factories. I know there was a big interruption early on, but even I've heard of some like Germans or Italian companies that are going and sending their technicians to Mexico for 2 weeks so that they can cross into the U.S. After being able to demonstrate that they've been out of the Schengen area for 14 days, which is, it shows you something about the resilience of that kind of travel, especially. I mean, maybe some of the meetings that can be done over Zoom will be done that way, but a lot of that stuff when it comes to
that's still going on. I have a client particular if it's a foreign company operating here in the U.S. And so that expat that is not a U.S. citizen, they have been waiting from the U.S. embassy in Europe for the permit to come back, and for 3 weeks, and they haven't gotten. So Sergio, I might call you and see if you could help this company from Spain. You know who they are. and he's stuck in Madrid and he cannot get back. And he's thinking about going to Cancun for 2 weeks, enjoy the beach, and then be able to come here. But
Well,
the same thing from Brazil. I know a couple of executives that are Brazilian citizens, but they live here. They cannot get back. They're not getting the permits.
Yeah,
So
as far as I understand too, it has to do with where you are versus your citizenship. So like if you're coming from, Brazil and you're banned.
But if you're a U.S. citizen, you do get the permit.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You're coming home, but if you're not, even if you're a resident, you're not. So that's where the issue is with the expat community. So anyhow.
Yeah, well, thank y'all so much for all this insight. We really appreciate it, for the featured speakers especially, but everybody else for hanging on with us for this long. We usually don't go this long, but we enjoy when we get the chance to go this long because it means we have a lot of discussions going on. So really appreciate it. We'll close it out here, and y'all stay tuned for the next one.
And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trevor.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
See y'all soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.